This map shows you, by using colored dots, the location of the 4 sites voted at the 1986 annual spring town meeting for affordable or low to moderate income housing. You can see that these sites are scattered, which is one of the goals of the Housing Authority. I am Sandra Rodgers, and this program will begin by touring the 4 sites with Jerry Keefe, Executive Director of the Winchester Housing Authority, because many people have not seen them, nor do they know how these sites are to be used. We shall then proceed to 3 interviews, one with Mary Meader, Chairman of the Winchester Housing Authority, then with Town Manager Chad Maurer, and finally with David Mortensen, Chairman of the Study Committee on Low to Moderate Income Housing. The focus was what has been going on since spring town meeting, discussing the Woburn Loop Site, and the fall town meeting warrant articles on alternative sites.
Good morning. My name is Jerry Keefe, and I'm the Executive Director of the Winchester Housing Authority. You are viewing right now the Palmer Street site, which is a proposed location for a triplex to be built here. The triplex will be centered up on this side of the hill. The entrances will be coming in off the walkway. We've had preliminary design review by ZBA, who found no major problems with the sketch as presented by Phil Acasio, a local architect. Phil is attempting to put a triplex in here that will maintain the architectural integrity of the neighborhood by blending it both with the condos on that side of the development and our elderly housing up here on the hill. He's been very careful to make sure that some of the fine trees that are in this particular section will remain. They will not be removed. We'll be able to put the triplex in without touching them. The ZBA had recommended to us that this end of the site, the topography be lowered so that we do not create a traffic hazard, a blind driveway going out on Palmer Street. The point I think that's very important to be made here is that the driveway will angle in close to the fence, and that way we will be staying in close proximity to the existing parking lot at the condos. The difference here being that the vehicles will be able to turn in this particular area and drive out as opposed to backing out onto Lake Street as they have to do at the adjacent property. The other important thing is, again, as I say, Phil has made a great attempt to create a buffer zone between our driveway and the chain link fence that you see behind you, so that there will be privacy both for our tenants and the privacy of the condominium association people will also be maintained. So hopefully by the time the leaves turn again next year, we'll have a nice triplex sitting here at Palmer Street. Thank you. This particular site is the Mullen Park Site. At present, it was deeded over, or will be deeded over through town meeting action of this past spring to the Housing Authority for a single-family unit on this particular site. This is a larger site. It's a 20,000 square foot lot. The reason being that the zoning in this particular area of the town calls for 20,000 square feet for a single-family home. As you can see, it's quite heavily wooded. We feel that this again will provide a buffer for the neighbor next door. And as far as the park is concerned, off to my left, the house will barely be visible to the park area. We moved it down to this end of the field, or requested it down this end for those particular reasons. At present, bill has been filed through Representative Saltmarsh. We attended a hearing before the local rules committee in the State House. They reported it out favorably. It has gone through the House for action. It has gone through the Senate, and at this particular time it is now on the governor's desk just awaiting his signature. So this would be our other single-family unit. Again, I'd like to emphasize that it's a much larger lot due to the zoning requirements, and it was a very serious consideration of both the Housing Authority and the Citizens Advisory Committee to maintain the zoning integrity and not ask for spot zoning to create any further problems. We feel the house will settle in here very nicely, and it should complement the neighborhood. Again, preliminary talks with architects and whatnot, and EOCD take very strong stands on maintaining the architectural integrity of a neighborhood, so that every effort will be made to build a unit here that will blend in and not make it stand out as an eyesore for this particular neighborhood. We're quite pleased with the lot, and hopefully this time of year from now we'll see a beautiful home here. This particular site is the Ambrose School Site. As you can see in the background, the Sanborn building at the top of the hill. This property was declared surplus by the school committee, and later at town meeting voted to the Housing Authority as a site for one of our single-family housing units. The lot itself will be about 10,000 square feet. We are showing you the Sanborn School only to orientate you as to where we are on the property. If you look to my left, over in the shrubbed area, is where the actual home will be built, so that it won't interfere with any of the recreational purposes that this property or this particular hill is used for, especially in the winter with sledding and so on. It will be nestled over in the corner. It will be as close to the property line as zoning laws allow, and again, there will be a sufficient barrier with the evergreens and whatnot that run the property line between the adjacent property and this site. Naturally, the shrub in the front of the property here will be removed so that we'll have access to Cambridge Street, but it is an ideal location from a family housing point of view, since schools are close by, transportation is close by, and it's convenience of the stores and whatnot. It meets all the criteria that was required for a site by EOCD, and we're very pleased to have this particular site. This is the Woburn Loop Site. We're standing at the cross street end of the loop. As you can see, this proposed site would accommodate a duplex in this particular area. It is intended to go along the railroad right-of-way, and it would encroach out into the former track bed by about 8 to 10 feet. However, as you probably know, at this point, Secretary Salvucci has ruled against allowing the town to grant us a building permit because this is abandoned right-of-way property. However, it is the intention of the authority to pursue the matter further. We are now in the process of arranging an appointment to see the governor and plead our case directly to him, since he's a strong advocate for family housing, and it's one of the major planks in his political administration. We propose to attempt to get the governor to understand our commitment to fulfill the understanding Winchester has with EOCD, and it is very, very important that this site be given to the authority for the purpose of building a duplex home. And as you look at the lot and the whole area in general, I think you'd have to agree that a duplex house in this particular site could fail to do nothing more than enhance the whole neighborhood, because it certainly doesn't offer much to the eye in the condition that it's in. And if we're not allowed to build on it, no one else will be allowed to do any building on it. I would imagine that the site is going to stay in the condition it's in now, which is not very attractive.
Hello, I'm here with Mary Meader, who's the chairperson of the Winchester Housing Authority. Ms. Meader, let's talk a little bit first about your most recent trip in to talk to the people from the EOCD. I gather it was regarding two of the sites that were approved by town meeting. Can you tell me how that meeting went?
Well, actually, I wasn't too happy when I left the meeting. I had asked for the appointment with Suzanne Barclay, who is the coordinator for 705 housing. And we feel now that we have resolved the issues on 3 sites. And we feel we will resolve the Woburn Loop, because we don't feel that Mr. Salvucci has any right to deny us the use of the loop. So because of the time element, we'd like to start building, and we'd like to get the money to get the architects and start building on the 5 units. And the 5 units, actually, while we're waiting, there are 5 families out there that we feel that the state has told us need the housing. We know they need the housing, and why wait? But they don't seem to agree with us, and we haven't really we didn't feel we were successful the other day. Now, I think that they will give it a lot of thought, because we spent 2.5 hours there Monday afternoon, and Chad Maurer and another member of my board, William McCarthy, and our executive director. And we explained why we feel that they should do this now.
Are they trying to get you to wait until all the sites have been
That's
approved?
exactly what they're trying to do. They're trying to wait they're telling us to wait on the Woburn Loop. Now, the other day when we were there, we asked Suzanne Barclay if they had communicated at all with Mr. Salvucci, because here is one state agency that could very nicely communicate with Mr. Salvucci and say, we want this housing. And she said, no, I haven't, and I don't think that anyone else has. So we're really not too happy with the OCD. And you know we're not happy with Mr. Salvucci, because Mr. Salvucci has been denying us the right to build, and right in the lease, it says that this land will no longer be needed for transportation. And there are so many issues on the loop that we feel that eventually we'll be able to do this, because we are pursuing it.
Yes, and I know there's a bill that's gotten through the House and going to the Senate now. You were telling me before there's also an article on the warrant which could help the Woburn Loop
Yes,
issue.
there is Article 28 on the warrant will sort of narrow it down to this bill down. It will probably be an amendment to confine this to the Woburn Loop.
This would be an amendment to the bill that went through?
To the bill. I'm not too clear yet on exactly how they will approach it, but I believe it will be some sort of an amendment, and it will confine it to the Woburn Loop. Now, that might do the trick, because now they're saying, well, you know, this will hurt Mr. Salvucci all over the state. And we're not interested in hurting Mr. Salvucci, but we are interested in these 2 units, because we feel it was really one of the best sites. We had no opposition from neighbors, and it was passed unanimously through town meeting. And it's near transportation, schools, etc. So we didn't. And another thing, we didn't even know when we chose the site that there were any restrictions, and we thought, you know, it would just go through. So anyway, that was the situation.
Did you have the impression from the state? I mean, they had sent letters kind of saying that, well, this is not, we're not too keen on this in terms of there may be alternative uses that we'd rather see. Was there real confusion before town meeting about whether the state would approve this? Did you really think the state would? Because they had given rumblings that they wouldn't.
We really didn't have any reason to believe that the state was going to give us any problem on the Woburn Loop. We really learned on May 10th, we had an informational forum, and that was when we first learned that Mr. Salvucci had some other ideas about the loop than we knew about. I'm a town meeting member, and I remembered when we were asked to purchase the Woburn Loop, nothing was said that, you know, it would be passive use. So actually, we really didn't know anything about it
until May.
Until May 10th. Mm-hmm. May 10th. That's when the Housing Authority knew it. May 10th.
Now, in this recent week, we've seen a letter from Mr. Flatley at the EOCD. This is kind of the second letter that has come with a very strict tone about it, kind of saying to the town that your time is running out. If you don't get a plan together soon, we're going to basically stop your discretionary funds. This has been compared to holding a gun to the town's head. Is that an apt analogy, do you think?
I think it is. And Mr. Flatley, as I understand it, is no longer in this department. He's in the department, but he's gone on to something else in housing. And I don't think he's aware of exactly what's going on, for the simple reason that in the letter, he sent the letter to Michael Sirocco, chairman of the Housing Authority, chairman of the Board of Selectmen. Well, Mr. Sirocco hasn't been chairman of the Board of Selectmen for a year. Mm-hmm. And I also, the tone of the letter angered me, because we've done so much since June 9th, when town meeting ended, that he couldn't possibly say that we were restrictive or we weren't doing what we were supposed to be doing.
The letter even questions the fact that the town has been negotiating in good faith. I mean, it questions whether the town has been negotiating in good faith. What do you think of that?
Well, I'm angry about that, because I think we have been doing what we're supposed to be doing. I think it's time for them to start doing what they should be doing. We've, on the Palmer Street site, we plan to build a triplex there, and we've used town money to go before the Board of Appeals with the preliminary site plan review. Now, we cannot go further until they release, EOCD releases the funds, and the call that I made to Suzanne Barclay to set this meeting up was to tell her, we are at a standstill. We need the money now, and because the town paid for this preliminary site plan review, and this isn't the way it's supposed to be.
Now, what about, it may be just a coincidence, but it seems right after this letter was received, the selectmen decided to make recommendations on the alternative sites that had been suggested by the town study committee, and they, I believe it was Sylvester Avenue site that they said, well, we'll recommend this one. They didn't recommend any of the other alternative sites proposed by the study committee. What do you think of that action by the Board of Selectmen? Is that helping things along, or is it making things worse, or what?
Well, the Housing Authority isn't going to make any selections, because we feel we have made our selections, and we really feel that these alternate sites have muddied the waters a little bit, for the simple reason that in the letter that we received from Mr. Salvucci, he said, you have alternate sites. Well, how does he know we have alternate sites, except we didn't have the alternate sites out there. We've been working on these sites. Also, I feel, from speaking with Ms. Barclay the other day, she more or less said, well, so you have alternate sites anyway. Well, we don't feel that way right now. We will have alternate sites if this fails, but we really don't think it's going to fail, and we're working so hard to get on it. We just are upset about it. The Housing Authority right now is very upset.
We thanked Mary Meader, and now go on to our interview with Chad Maurer for his comments regarding the Woburn Loop site.
How did it get to the point where it still became considered at town meeting? Well, I think the confusion around that particular site is that there was a letter that was received by the Housing Authority that approved several sites, and then it named deficiencies in the balance of the sites. And as I understand it, the position that the Housing Authority takes is that the state never formally rejected the Woburn Loop site. What they did is they just made negative comments with respect to it. The other sites were recognized by the state as being approved, and they said so. But the Housing Authority's position is that because the state never formally said no, that it was still a valid site if the obstacles could be overcome.
Do you think that this is something the town will be able to get? Do you think they'll be able to override the objections of Secretary Salvucci for this site and get it as part of its housing plan?
I would hope so. And I know that's probably not an acceptable answer, but let me just qualify that. The Woburn Loop site is more than just a site for housing. And the issue in the Woburn Loop is more than a housing issue. The Woburn Loop issue, or the Woburn Loop site, relates to the town's use of the Woburn Loop in its entirety. And if you go back to when the town acquired the site was turned over to the town by the Department of the MBTA, and there were deed restrictions that were lifted on that, which eliminated the requirement for future transportation use. And what has happened, that the state is now saying that they may want that to be considered for future transportation use. So the issue on the loop is not a housing issue as much as it's an issue of land use and the right of a local government, once it acquires a piece of property, to be able to use it for what the community wants to use it for, as opposed to still having the state being able to dictate or mandate what it can be used for. Unfortunately, it is projected now as a housing issue because that's the first piece of development that we want to place on the loop.
Would it be feasible then to continue fighting for use of the loop site and still look at another alternative to fill out the seven units of housing?
My feeling is that we should be aggressively fighting for the Woburn Loop site because as I mentioned, there's more than just a housing issue at stake here. It's the right of the local government to determine how it wants to use a piece of its own property. And in order to aggressively fight for that, it's difficult to start to look for another alternative simultaneously, because when you do that, you kind of signal to someone, in this instance the state, that there is another way of doing it, and therefore the pressure is not on the state to take action. What the state will do is to turn it around and say that it's the responsibility of local government to come up with an alternative because we said no. And what I think we're arguing with on the Woburn Loop is that they didn't have the right to say no, because it is Winchester property, and we have the right to, through our town meeting, to determine how that property is going to be used.
Last question. There has been a lot of confusion on this issue, and some people point to a lack of communication. Do you think that has been a problem in the past, and if so, is it a problem now?
I don't look on this problem. This is a problem of lack of communication, because I don't think there's been any one issue where there's been more paperwork that's been generated between committees, and the communication has been there. I think where the problem comes with respect to this is the interpretation of the communication. And I think that one board will read a communication and interpret it in one fashion, another board will read it and interpret it in another fashion. And I think that the interpretation of what has been written has caused the problem, not the fact that people aren't talking to each other. The fact is that it's not how they're talking to each other, it's how they're listening to each other. Witness the example that I used earlier is that the Housing Authority received a letter from the state which approved X number of houses and then X number of sites, and then it listed concerns with the balance of the sites. And the interpretation that was made by the Housing Authority and then transmitted publicly ultimately to the town meeting was that the state had approved a site. And what the state is saying is we never approved the site. and
Meaning the Woburn Loop?
meaning the Woburn Loop. And the Housing Authority interpreted as being approved. The state said, well, we said that, but we meant that it was disapproved. And I think that in fairness, that if the state was disapproving the site, then the letter should have been a categorical disapproval of the site, as opposed to saying it has a problem and then not commenting on it one way or the other. Because the impression that the Housing Authority was under was that it was approved with conditions.
We thanked Chad Maurer and then spoke to David Mortensen about the work of the study committee on low to moderate income housing.
First of all, your committee has come up with several things to be added to the warrant for town meeting in the fall. Can you explain to me how you arrived at these sites, which would be considered by town meeting for as a backup for housing if one of the sites that is presently being used is not?
Yes, we became concerned over the course of the summer that the closing of the warrant for the fall town meeting would fast approach in about the 20th of September, and nothing was being done to provide with a contingency plan for the town in the event one of the 4 sites was disapproved. And it became quite apparent during August and September that Secretary Salvucci would once again disapprove the Woburn Loop. So we went to each of the other boards, the Planning Board, the Selectmen, and the Housing Authority, and suggested that some contingency plan be adopted. None of them was willing to come up with a contingency plan. So our committee decided that something needed to be done so that the town meeting was not once again left without any options. What we did was to go back to the sites originally proposed to the state by the Selectmen, the Housing Authority, and the Planning Board, and took those sites which hadn't been used but which had previously been proposed and put them back on the warrant. It's been said that we selected the sites. We didn't. We didn't have time and we weren't asked to. What we did was go back to the sites previously approved by these boards and suggested by them to the state and said, let's take another look at them.
Do you feel that in any sense your committee has overexceeded its authority or what, as people are hinting at?
No, because in fact we were specifically charged with the responsibility to monitor the progress or lack thereof, to report from time to time and to make recommendations. And unless there was a warrant article within which the town meeting had the ability to act, anything we recommended would have been for naught. And indeed, our recommendations could not have been acted upon until next spring. That was one of the great frustrations of the June town meeting when people stood up and said, what about this alternative or that alternative? They said, no, you cannot consider that because no one put a warrant article into the warrant.
So you're trying to, prevent that type of thing from happening?
That's correct. I think if any message came out of the town meeting in the spring, it was that the town meeting no longer, ever again, wanted to be put into the box where the options were not available to it. The problem here is a lack of contingency planning on the part of the elected boards of the town. If one of these sites is turned down, the town is left in the position that with no contingency plan, the state could any day grow tired or impatient and once again say that progress is too slow and declare the town not in compliance with the fair housing standards of the state and yank all of our money for other public works. That was the dilemma we were in the spring. The state has been holding off patiently since the spring town meeting to see what progress has been made. But now that the loop site has been turned down, the only alternatives being suggested by the elected boards are a meeting with the governor or legislation to change the state law or a possible lawsuit. And we suspect that kind of dilatory motion, whether it succeeds or not, and I wish it would succeed, but we have great doubt whether it would, and it's clear it will take a great deal of time.
What about the argument that the town should be fighting for the Woburn Loop and that this just bringing up these other issues at this point is just going to make the defense of the Woburn Loop harder?
The town has been fighting for the Woburn Loop, and we have been careful as a committee not to get in the way of the elected boards in their dealings with the state. We have not, for example, ever communicated directly with the state. We have stood back and we have made it known publicly all along that we supported the efforts. The argument has been made that somehow by putting alternative sites onto the warrant we were tipping the state's hand or we were alerting the state to the fact that there are alternatives. But that's really overlooking the history of the case. The town told the state all along that we had an alternative list. The state has files, it has memory. It's only a year ago that they knew that the town was proposing 11 sites. This notion that we're somehow tipping the state off to the fact that there are other sites in town is foolish. The state knows darn well that there are other sites which this town's boards have already said were acceptable to them, and the state must be wondering why the town boards are unwilling to look to it. So we do not really accept that criticism with any merit.
Is this a leadership problem? Is this a matter of the town not having any one particular board that wants to come out and lead the way on this? Or is this a case of too many cooks spoiling the broth, or what?
It's partly a lack of a breakdown in communication. I should say a great many people have worked very hard and long on the issue. And one of the things I discovered when our committee was formed and we began to study it was how many hours had been put in by so many people on so many boards. Part of the problem is that in most towns, the leadership in this kind of issue is taken by the housing authority, and does not become a problem. The present housing authority in Winchester has so wedded itself to this 7-unit 4-site program that it not only refuses to consider contingency planning, it also has stopped altogether any involvement in long-range planning. When we met with them in the summer, we asked what long-range planning is being done, and they told us none. When we asked what contingency planning was being done, they told us none.
You mentioned to me before that there may be another cost issue involved because the town has kind of been taking so long with this whole thing that there may be more money involved than the town originally thought.
Yes, when the when the EOCD grant was originally made, the state offered $65,000 for each of the 7 units, which the town boards had contracted to build. As inflation has taken over the past 2 years, the state has agreed to increase that to $82,000 per unit. Problem has been that the independent study done by our committee, as well as information we've gotten from Senator Krause's office, unanimously shows that a minimum of $20,000 and probably somewhere between $20,000 and $30,000 needs to be added on just to build the building to the EOCD standards. Now, one of the problems is that the housing authority, insofar as we have been able to determine, has taken no steps to propose to the town meeting a mechanism to appropriate the additional money needed. So we have, as one of our articles, placed on the warrant an article which would permit the town meeting to consider that problem. It's interesting to note that ever since the spring town meeting, the housing authority took no steps to go on to the 4 sites to determine what the subsurface soil conditions were in order to find out what unusual expenses would be incurred for a foundation or utility hookups. And that was only done in August after our committee pressed to have it done and got the money from the selectmen for the housing authority to do it. Even then they wouldn't spend the money, and it ended up being done by the town engineer.
So you're saying there's basically a lack of long-range planning. People are just thinking day to day and not what Winchester is going to have to do down the long haul.
Unfortunately, there seemed to be a mindset on the part of the housing authority that put all the eggs in one basket and go hell-bent for leather for the one solution. The problem with that theory is that the Secretary of Transportation told the town before the spring town meeting that he would not approve the Woburn Loop Site.
Is this is something that I don't know if people realize. You're saying that the state basically told them beforehand that the loop was not acceptable?
Yes, and in writing.
And why was it presented at town meeting as if it was an alternative?
Because it was the choice of the housing authority. I should point out that the EOCD had turned down the loop site as unbuildable.
So it had been turned down on 2 fronts?
That's right.
Yet it was accepted by town meeting?
Yet it was accepted by town meeting because the only other alternative on the warrant was Hemingway and Canal, and the town meeting was told that that could not be considered because of prior promises made to the neighbors. So what the town meeting was faced with was a choice which involved no choices. We either had to vote for the 4 sites presented, or the town would have defaulted on the contract.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Even though the taping for this program has been done recently, several additional things have happened. In fact, with town meeting getting closer and closer, things have been happening with incredible rapidity. As the taping was being concluded, the letter from EOCD Assistant Secretary Joseph Flatley had arrived a few days earlier, saying, and I quote, "Based on the town's record to date, there is some basis for this agency to determine that the town of Winchester is unreasonably restrictive of affordable housing growth, and that the town would therefore be ineligible for state discretionary grants pursuant to Executive Order 215, unquote. And goes on to cite the reasons for this determination. The town was given 30 days to demonstrate that it was meeting its commitments. The selectmen then decided to rank the Sylvester Avenue site from the alternative list as their #1 choice, if needed, because the Woburn Loop Site could not be resolved in time to comply with a 30-day EOCD deadline. Since then, a letter has been received from EOTC, Secretary Frederick Salvucci, restating his position on the Woburn Loop Site for housing purposes and offers to recommend to the MBTA to buy back the Winchester's portion of the Woburn Loop. On the heels of that letter came the announcement to the Board of Selectmen that the Housing Authority had received notice that the owner of Winchester Gardens would be prepared to sell a duplex to the town that could be a substitution for the Woburn Loop Site at a cost of possibly $275,000. At this point, the Board of Selectmen decided to hold a special town meeting on November 24th to deal with a housing issue, meaning that all of the housing articles for the regular fall town meeting will also be discussed at that time. And finally, most recently, the school committee has been approached by Wade Welch, chairman of the Board of Selectmen, and Bob Frank, vice chairman of the study committee on low to moderate income housing, telling them to prepare to vote quickly, if necessary, on some school property as an alternative to the Woburn Loop Site. The school committee will take the matter up at their meeting on November 12th. I would strongly urge you to keep informed about further developments that occur between now and November 24th. Decisions made at this time will be important to the town of Winchester. Thank you.